Okay, we're back. This is Techmath1. We're looking at the notes out of the blue book, and we're jumping to, we're not jumping to, I already made a video 1.1 to 1.3. We're now looking at 1.4. So we're going to go to page 15 and start with note number 36. Number 36, it's negative 10 over 5. It's negative 56 over 7 over negative 7, sorry. And it's 28 over negative 4. So those are the first three problems where we're just looking at positive, 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 negative. Like when you divide or multiply, negative 2/3 divided by negative 8. Ooh, that's a little trickier. And negative 4 divided by 1/2. Okay, so when you take a negative divided by a positive, that's a negative. So that's negative 2. When you take a negative divided by a negative, that's positive. So that's positive 8. When you take a positive divided by a negative, that's negative. And so 7. So hopefully you got those down. Again, you get to use your calculator so you can, if you tend to make mistakes, like silly errors with division, pump it into your calculator. Make sure you use the negative button, not the minus button when you type that in. Now here, it's a little tougher with these. When I'm dividing fractions, that's a fraction over a fraction. This is how physics people write it like that all the time. Let's write it like a math person here, divided by negative 8, and we'll call it negative 8 over 1, so it looks like a fraction. All right, now we have negative 2/3, and we never divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, and now we just do top times top, bottom times bottom, and then reduce. So top times top, numerator times numerator, negative 2, denominator times denominator, negative 24. A negative divided by a negative, remember we just did that, that's a positive, so that equals positive 2/24, and then you can reduce it to 1/12. Okay, let's do the same thing. Negative 4 divided by 1/2. That's negative 4 over 1 divided by 1 over 2. I never divide fractions, I multiply by the reciprocal. And so now you do that times that, negative 8, that times that, 1, and the answer is just plain old negative 8. Negative 8 over 1 is fine, but normally we don't put the 1 on the bottom. All right, let's look at 1.5. Again, hopefully this is mostly review for everybody, that you've done all of this at some point and you just need a little refresher. All right, so let's take a look at 1.5, number 44, negative 7.6 plus 0. We've got 0 plus 3/4. Operations with 0, huh? And then 45 here, I'm going to write them out. 0 minus 2/3, 17.5 minus 0. We got negative 5/4 minus 0. We had 0 minus negative 3.96. 46. Got 1/2 times 0. We got 0 times negative 6.4. 47. 0 divided by negative 5.9. We got 0 divided by 1/4. Okay. All right. And then, oh yeah, maybe we can squeeze 49 in there. It's going to be the same answer. 12 divided by 0, 0 divided by 0, 0 divided by 12, and negative 1 divided by 0. All right. So let's go through and do these. We got negative 7.6 plus 0. That's just negative 7.6, of course. Actually, adding 0 is called the additive identity. the identity for the addition. When you think about adding, you combine things, and an identity means you end up with what you started with. So if I say 7 plus 0 is 7, see, I ended up with what I started with. And so that means the additive identity is adding 0. All right, so 3/4, 0 minus 2/3. The negative is on the 2/3, so it stays negative 2/3. 17.5 subtract 0. Negative 5/4 minus 0 is still negative 5/4. This one we have to rewrite into 0 plus 3.96 is 3.96. 0 times anything is 0, and you remember that forever. 0 divided by anything is 0. You can take 0 divided by negative 5.9 and you'll get 0. You can take 0 divided by a fraction and you get 0. What you can't do is divide by 0. Because now remember how division works. If I say 18 divided by 3 is 6, you should be able to work it backwards. 18 divided by 3 is 6, or I could say 6 times 3 is 18. All right? So 0 times negative 5.9 is 0. 0 times 1/4 is 0. I can work it backwards there. Here I can't. They're asking, what do I multiply by 0 to get 12? And that's undefined because 0 is special. Remember, 0 times anything is 0. This is undefined. Even if you take 0 divided by 0, it's undefined. 0 divided by 12, that's 0. That's okay. When 0's on the top, the answer comes out to be 0. When 0's on the bottom, trouble in River City. You can't do that. So this is undefined. Negative 1 divided by 0 is undefined, undefined. And then they threw in a 0 and then undefined. All right. Next section we're going to do is 1.6. Oh, C-3PO, me and my son built life-size droids I wanted to show him how to use power tools. So R2-D2, we used a lot of power tools. That's the first one we did. And then we did C-3PO, and then we did BB-8. And we take them to Children's Hospital a couple of times a year. I wasn't going to do BB-8, but the little kids at the hospital said, "Where's BB-8?" And so we made a BB-8. All right, so what are we doing here? Use the commutative property. Oh, all right, so commutative property for 1.6. Commutative property just means if you can write it forwards or backwards and there's only two things. All right, so see how there's two things here? This is number 50 on page 19. So when there's two things, you can write it in the reverse order. That's the commutative property. Think of your commute. If you start at home and then you go to work and then you stay at work for a while and then from work you go right back home. That in between is called your commute. Commutative, there's only ever two things and you just write it the other way around. So addition is commutative, so is multiplication. And so these are both addition problems. Negative 1/4, and so then if they tell me negative 1/4 plus 1/2, that's the commutative property. All right, let's take a look at 51. That's again the commutative property for 51, so we're still doing the commutative property. It's just for multiplication, so negative 5 times 6. They don't want negative 30, they want 6 times 5. They just want you to switch the order, okay? Negative 2/3 times negative 7, that's going to be negative 7 times negative 2/3. So all I did was wrote it in the other order. That's all the commutative property is. All right, associative property means you got more than two things. It can be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 things. And the associative property, again, works for addition and multiplication. There is no commutative property for subtraction. There is no commutative property for division. These only work for addition and multiplication, all right? So look, if I have negative 3 plus 5 plus 9, and they put parentheses around there, that means they're adding those two first. If they want me to show the associative property, I'm going to write the same thing in the same order, but now I'm going to shift the parentheses to the other two numbers. Like that. And so what I'm saying here is I would add those first and get 2, and then 2 plus 9 is 11. And what I'm saying here is I would add these two first and get 14, and then 14 plus -3 is also 11. So that is the associative property of addition. All right, here, 52, -6 plus -7, in brackets, plus -1. Again, if you're doing the associative property, you keep the order the same. Don't switch up the order, but you change the bracket in this case, or you change the parenthesis in that case, all right? And that's an example of the associative property. Now, you probably have done that. Again, if you think about adding up numbers in your head, what if I wanted you to add 17 plus 58 plus 83? If I told you to add those up in your head, and you looked at them carefully, you might notice that 83 and 17, if I combine those, I get 100. So instead of adding it in the order that I'm seeing it and doing 17 plus 58, figuring that out, and then adding 83, I can rearrange it, do the 17 plus 83, and then tack on the 58 and get 158 without actually, writing it or clicking it into a calculator. That's the associative property. The associative property says you can change up the order when there's more than two numbers. Commutative property says you can change up the order when there's only two numbers. All right, so let's look at 53. We got more of the same. -4 times 5 times 6. And then again, if I want to do the associative property, I leave the order the same, but I change the parentheses, which changes the order in which you do it. All right. Same with this one. 3 times -5 times -9. The associative property then, I'd have 3 times -5 times -9, but I would shift. This time they put the parentheses on the second two, so I'd shift them to the first two to show the associative property. And then identity property of multiplication is when you multiply by 1. Remember what I said identity means. So like 54 here, I've got 1 times -3.44. That is -3.44. So I got out what I started with. That's the identity property. All right, so the identity property for multiplication is multiplying by 1, because you basically multiply, but you end up with the same thing that you started with. So I started with 5/3, I multiplied it by 1, so I did a multiplication, but I ended up with 5/3. That's why that's called an identity property. And yeah, we talked about the addition ones already, so. Oh, here, I guess that's in the homework. So let me do one more on 1.6. And so this is the last one for we're still on 1.6. And here, 4 times -7 equals -7 times 4. 0 plus -1 equals -1. 3 times 4 times 8 is equal to 3 times 4 times 8. We got -5 plus 3 plus 4 equals -5 plus 3 plus 4. And we got -3 plus 2 equals 2 plus -3. And we got 1 times -7 equal to -7. Okay, so they want to know the properties. So look, 4 times -7 equals -7 times 4. That's the commutative property of multiplication. Zero plus -1 is equal to -1. That's the addition identity. Additive identity. Addition identity. We'll call it additive ID. You got three things, 3 times 4 times 8, and then 3 times 4 times 8, and they did change up the order, so they shifted it from that to that. So that is the associative property of multiplication. Negative 5 plus 3 plus 4, negative 5 plus 3 plus 4. Again, gotta just make sure I wrote that down correctly, and I did. So they left the numbers in the same order, but they switched the order in which you add them first. So that gets added first, that gets added first. So that's the associative property of addition. Negative 3 plus 2 equals 2 plus negative 3. That's commutative again of addition. And 1 times negative 7 equals negative 7. Multiplicative identity or identity of multiplication. Depends on how fancy you want to sound. All right, so that is 1, 4 and 1, 5 and 1, 6.